Hey guys, thank you for joining our second devotional of Joy Week about joy. Yesterday we kind of defined joy and try to make sure we understood what joy really meant, and that joy is unchanging. Joy is consistent. Joy is steady regardless of the situations that are happening around us. And for some of you right now, you're like, you know what? I want that. I want that joy. I want that consistency and that steady feeling of fulfillment and purpose in my life no matter what is going on. Because right now, when things change, my happiness changes. When a situation occurs in my life, then my purpose and my fulfillment goes away. And then only the way I get that back is if something else changes again. And I don't want to be wishy-washy like that. I want to be steady. I want to be confident. I want to be consistent and feel that purpose and that joy and that happiness inside of me always overflowing despite what is happening in my life. So Pastor Sam, God, show me, right? Show me how I can have that joy today. And so I want to take this a step at a time. And each day after this will be another step to show you how to have this joy. So today, step one, how to have the restored and renewed joy in our lives. All right, so let's follow the action steps of David. And we find those in Psalms 51. I think this is a great verse for each of us to understand how we begin to have our joy renewed in our lives. And so when we look at verse 1, David starts out by humbling himself before the Lord. And he's pursuing God's mercy and he's pursuing God's forgiveness. And so when you look at verse 1 in Psalms 51, I encourage you to go there and read all of it and put it all into one big perspective. But when you look at Psalms 51 verse 1, David is humbling himself before the Lord. David is calling out his own sin. He realizes, oh my gosh, I have lived for months and months and months with sin that I knew I had. David was fully aware of the sin that he had committed, the sin that he had carried around, the sin that he was harboring in his life. He knew that he was carrying that day to day, and David had finally come to the point that he did not want to carry this sin around any longer. He did not want to be weighed down by the burden of his decisions in his past any longer. So he comes before God. He humbles himself before God. He calls on God's grace and his mercy and his forgiveness to his life. So here in chapter 51, David is beginning to recognize that his sinfulness is a hindrance to his joy. And so when we look at Psalms chapter 51 verse 1, let me read these first two verses to you. It says, David is crying out to God and he says, "Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love, because of your great compassion. Blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me, God, from my sins." David has gotten to the point in his life where he is no longer satisfied with living with his sin. And he's coming before God saying, "Purify me, God. Take my sin away." Have you gotten to that place in your life? Are you prepared today? Are you willing that in this moment, are you willing to come clean with your sin and humble yourself before God and say, "God, I'm tired of it. Take my sin away." That's where David has gotten to. David is so desperate for change. And as we follow David through the next few verses, David is coming to the realization that God had never hidden himself from him, ever. That God had been with him every step of the way. That he realizes that even in the midst of me sinning, that even in the midst of me making those decisions, God, that you were never hidden from me, that I actually were performing those sins directly in the presence of you, God. And how shameful I feel with the realization that you were there while I was sinning. And he says, "I'm sorry, God. Have mercy on me. Show me, God. I know that I deserve the consequences. I know that I did wrong. I know that I deserve punishment, but I'm humbling myself before you, saying, please, God, take these away from me. Give me mercy, withhold the consequences, and I will live for you, Jesus." Are you prepared and willing to do that? And as we go into verse 10 of chapter 51, where David says this, he says, "Create in me a pure heart, God." David is saying, God, I don't want the desires of my heart to be bent towards sin anymore. I do not want that sin. I do not want to carry it. I do not want the temptation, and I do not want the desire for that anyway. Create in me a pure heart. And not just create in me a pure heart where I don't want that sin any longer, but give me, it says, renew a steadfast spirit in me. What does that mean? It means, God, set my feet on a firm foundation. Help me to be so committed to your will and to your ways for my life that I won't even want to desire that sin any longer. Completely take it away. Give me a pure heart and give me a steadfast spirit. Help me be so committed to following you, God, in my life that I won't even have a desire of that any longer. And after he says, create in me a pure heart, God, and renew a steadfast spirit, do not cast me from your presence. God, renew a pure heart, a steadfast spirit, because God, I want to feel your presence in my life every day. This is David's heart, and this is his cry. David is recognizing that the prerequisite to feel God's presence in his life is a pure heart and a steadfast spirit. David is realizing that his sinfulness is a hindrance to his joyfulness. Do you want joy? Do you want to feel the joy of God in your life and to have the joy of your salvation? How do I have that today? Step one is recognizing your sinfulness and coming before God and saying, God, purify me. Take away my sin. Here's what happens when you're willing to do that. When you're willing to say right now, God, forgive me of my sin. Give me a pure heart, God. A heart that only desires for you. And when you have that pure heart, He will give you a steadfast spirit to be focused and completely committed to God. And when a steadfast spirit and a pure heart happen in your life, you will feel the presence of God return. And as the presence of God returns into your life will overflow with the joy of your salvation. That is step one. Today, the first step is recognizing and coming clean with the sin that you've carried for months. Next step will be tomorrow.